The first Sunday of every month, my family had dinner at Hargrove's Grill. That was the rule, unspoken but absolute, the way most rules in my family were. My father had opened the restaurant 26 years ago with a borrowed $20,000 and a handshake deal with a landlord who'd since retired to Florida. The booths were the same dark wood from the original build-out. The menu hadn't changed in a decade. Everyone in town knew it. Everyone in my family was proud of it. Everyone except me. Apparently, I was 34 years old. I lived alone in a 2-bedroom apartment 12 minutes from my parents' house and worked as a real estate developer, a job my family had spent years struggling to take seriously. My brother Derek ran the floor at Hargrove's and called himself the face of the business. His wife Brittany handled events and private bookings and never let anyone forget it. My sister Vanessa did the books part-time between her kids' school pickups. My father was still the heart of everything, still behind the line 4 nights a week even though his knees had been giving him trouble for 2 years. And me? I had left. That was the story they told. Maya left, went off to chase some career in real estate, left the family to carry the weight without her. That was the story. It wasn't the whole truth. I still came to the first Sunday dinners. I sat at the big round table in the back corner my father always reserved for us, ate the same pot roast I'd grown up eating, and listened to Derek talk about the restaurant like he'd built it with his own hands from nothing. I smiled when it was appropriate. I passed the bread basket. I had stopped trying to insert myself into conversations about the business years ago. It was easier that way. The December dinner was a week before Christmas. The restaurant was decorated garland over the bar, a small tree in the window, the staff wearing little felt antlers on headbands that I knew my father had suggested as a joke and somehow become tradition. My mother had outdone herself with the centerpiece. Vanessa's kids were chasing each other around the empty tables nearby, and Derek's son Cody, 11 years old and already with his father's posture and his mother's eyes, sat at the table scrolling through a game on his phone. I had driven over after a long week. We were closing on a commercial property in the east end of town, and the due diligence had run long. I was tired in the specific way that makes everything feel a little too loud, a little too bright. But I came because I always came, and because something in me still believed that showing up mattered. Dinner was served. My father came out of the kitchen to sit with us, wiping his hands on a towel tucked into his apron, and the table shifted the way it always did when he arrived, warmer, easier. He put his hand on my shoulder before he sat down and said, "Good to see you, sweetheart." It was small. I had learned to hold on to small things. The conversation moved the way it always did. Derek talked about a corporate holiday booking that had gone well. Brittany mentioned she was planning a Valentine's event for the dining room, already had 12 reservations confirmed. Vanessa said something about the new POS system. My father listened with that particular expression he had, proud and tired in equal measure. I was reaching for the water pitcher when Cody looked up from his phone. "Dad," he said, loud in the way children are when they don't realize they're being loud, "is Aunt Maya going to help pay for the expansion, or is she just here to eat again?" The table went quiet in the way that means everyone heard. Derek looked at his son, and for one moment I thought he was going to say something redirect, correct him the way a parent is supposed to. Instead, he looked down at his plate and cleared his throat. Vanessa suddenly found something very interesting about her water glass. My mother's hand tightened on her fork. Brittany pressed her lips together in that way she had that wasn't quite a smile but wasn't quite not one either. My father looked at me. I held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds before he looked away. 11 years old. Cody was 11 years old. He hadn't invented that sentence. He had heard it somewhere, repeated often enough that it had become casual, throwaway, the kind of thing you say without thinking because it's just what everyone believes. I set down my fork. I picked up my napkin, placed it beside my plate, and pushed my chair back from the table. "Good dinner, Dad," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "Maya, don't," my mother started. I kissed her on the cheek and walked out through the front door into the cold December air. My car was in the lot across the street. I sat in it for a few minutes with the heat off, watching the restaurant window glow from the inside. I could see the shape of my family at the table, small and warm and complete without me. I thought about the first time I'd heard a version of that sentence. I had been 28. Derek had told his father, within earshot of me, that I'd never put anything into this family. At the time, I had been 3 months into a decision that I hadn't told anyone about yet. Hargrove's Grill had been operating in the same building for 18 years. In that time, the original landlord had sold the property twice. When the second owner, a private investor, had put it on the market 3 years ago, I had found out through a contact in the commercial real estate community. The asking price was $1.4 million. My father didn't have that kind of capital and didn't know it was being sold. If a developer had bought it, and several were circling, Hargroves would have had 8 months on their existing lease before the new owner could have asked them to vacate or renegotiated the rent to triple what they were paying. I had bought the building through my LLC, Pinnacle Property Group. I paid $1.38 million. I had carried the financing myself, kept the rent exactly where it had been, and never said a word. My father thought he was still dealing with the same management company he'd always dealt with. As far as he knew, some faceless corporate entity owned the 4 walls his life's work existed inside. The lease was in the name of Hargrove's Grill LLC. The rent checks went to a property management account. No one had connected it to me because no one had thought to look. I drove home and sat on my couch in the quiet of my apartment and thought about a lot of things. At 9:47 that night, my father texted me. "Maya, I'm sorry about Cody. He shouldn't have said that. I want to talk to you about something important. The expansion on the east side of the building. We found a contractor. We need bridge financing to make the timing work. Are you in a position to help?" I stared at the message until the screen went dark. Then I opened my contacts and called my attorney, Nicole Park, who had handled the acquisition of the building 3 years ago and managed the lease on my behalf. "I need to begin the process of listing Hargrove's Grill," I said when she picked up the building. "I want to put it on the market." There was a pause. "Maya, are you sure?" "Start the process tomorrow." I turned off my phone and went to bed. I went to work the next morning and did not turn my phone back on until noon. When I did, there were 4 missed calls from my father, 2 from Derek, and 1 from my mother, no texts from Brittany or Vanessa. I noted that. I called Nicole. "I reached out to your property management contact this morning," she said. "I also had an independent valuation completed last month, so we're current on the numbers. The building is worth approximately $2.1 million at current market. I can begin outreach to qualified buyers this week. Before I do the tenant, they have 9 months left on the current lease. Any new buyer acquires that obligation. What are their options when the lease expires? Negotiate a new lease with the new owner, which could mean significant rent increases given the current market. Or vacate. What does the market look like for that space? 3 developers have approached me about the building in the last 18 months. One is specifically interested in mixed-use conversion. They would likely not renew the restaurant lease. Proceed. That evening, my father came to my apartment. I heard the knock but did not answer it. I watched through the peephole as he stood in the hallway, hands in the pockets of his coat, looking at the door as if he could see through it. He knocked twice more, then pressed his forehead briefly against the doorframe in a gesture that made my chest hurt in a way I did not want to feel. After several minutes, he left. The messages shifted over the following days. My mother wrote that she was worried about me. Vanessa sent a long text that began with "I know this isn't my business, but," and proceeded to make it very much her business. Derek called 3 times and left no voicemails, which told me he still didn't understand the scope of what was happening. On day 4, Nicole called with an update. The property management company formally notified Hargrove's Grill LLC of the pending ownership change. "I spoke with your father's attorney this morning. He was surprised to learn the identity of the current owner." "How did he respond?" "He asked if you would be willing to speak directly with your father before we proceed further. He described Richard Hargrove as quite distressed. All communications through your office." On day 6, Derek showed up at my workplace. My assistant called back to tell me he was in the lobby. I asked her to tell him I was in a client meeting all afternoon. I could see him through the glass partition as he stood at the reception desk, hands on his hips, jaw tight, looking around the office like he was cataloging it. He stayed for 25 minutes, then left. That same afternoon, Nicole forwarded me an inquiry from the Merchants District Preservation Council, a local organization that had received a tip about the potential sale of a building in their target area. They wanted to discuss whether the current tenants had any opportunity to acquire the property. Nicole had acknowledged receipt and told them the process was proceeding through standard channels. Day 8. Nicole called in the morning. I have an offer. The mixed-use developer, Callaway Development Group, is coming in at $2.05 million. That's a strong offer just under valuation, but they're offering a 30-day close with no contingencies. They have confirmed financing. What are their plans for the space? 14 luxury residential units above a ground-floor retail or restaurant space. However, their intention is not to continue with the existing tenant. They want a clean building at close. What does that mean for Hargrove's lease? Callaway would honor the remaining 9 months per their acquisition obligation. After that, Hargroves would need to vacate or negotiate a new lease, which Callaway has indicated they're not interested in. The new retail component is earmarked for a national chain. I was quiet for a moment. I'll review the offer tonight. On day 10, my sister Vanessa managed to reach me. I had stepped outside between meetings and she called my cell before I thought to let it go to voicemail. Maya. Her voice was tight and careful, the tone she used when she was trying not to say the wrong thing and knew she probably would anyway. I just need to understand what's happening. You own the building. Dad's building. How long? 3 years. The silence on her end was long. Why didn't you tell us? Because it wasn't about being thanked. So what was it about? It was about making sure Dad didn't lose his restaurant to a developer who would have gutted it for condos. I paused. Turns out that's happening anyway. Maya, you can't. The restaurant is everything to him. You know that. Whatever Cody said. It's not about what Cody said. Then what is it about? I thought about how to answer that honestly. Sit down somewhere and think about every family dinner for the last 6 years. Think about every conversation about the business that I was talked over in. Every time Derek introduced himself as the one who runs the family restaurant to someone standing right next to me. Think about how many times someone in that family laughed at a comment about my job, my choices, my life, and then came to me when they needed something. Vanessa was quiet. That's what it's about, I said. This will destroy Dad. He should have thought about that before his grandson learned to use me as a punchline at the dinner table. She hung up. I stood on the sidewalk in the cold for a moment, watching my breath disappear into the air. I went back inside. On day 12, my mother came to my office. My assistant, who by now had met 3 members of my family and seemed deeply confused about my life, called back to let me know. There's a Carol Hargrove here. She says she's your mother and she'll wait as long as she needs to. I asked her to offer my mother a coffee and tell her I'd be out when I could. I was in a legitimate meeting for another hour. When I came out, my mother was sitting in one of the lobby chairs with her coat still buttoned and her hands wrapped around a paper coffee cup she hadn't drunk from. She looked smaller than she had at the restaurant. She looked her age in a way that she usually didn't. She stood up when she saw me. I'm not asking you to undo anything, she said before I could speak. I just wanted to see you. I looked at her for a moment. Mom, you could have told us, she said quietly. When you bought it. You could have told us. I know. Why didn't you? I thought about the real answer. Because I wanted it to matter without being about me. I wanted to do something for this family and have it just be done. Without the negotiation, without the buyer gets credit for something now so we have to adjust how we treat her. I wanted to give something without it being a transaction. I paused. I was wrong to think it would work that way. My mother's eyes were wet. Cody didn't know what he was saying. He knew exactly what he was saying. He'd heard it enough times that it felt normal to say out loud. I was not unkind when I said it, but I did not soften it either. That's not his fault. He's 11. She left 15 minutes later without convincing me to stop the process. I walked her to the door, which I think surprised her, and watched her get into her car. She sat there for a few minutes before she drove away. On day 15, Nicole called with news about a second offer. The Merchants District Preservation Council has put together a group of local investors who want to counterbid. They're offering $1.9 million with a 60-day close, contingent on financing. They would maintain the existing tenant Hargrove's Grill and offer a 15-year lease renewal at market rate, which is about 40% higher than current. It's the better community outcome. It's the lower number. I was quiet for a moment. The difference between the two offers is $150,000. Correct. Callaway is also clean, no contingency, 30 days. What happens to the employees if Callaway closes the deal? Hargrove's Grill has 14 full-time and 8 part-time employees. At the end of the 9-month obligation period, they would need to find a new location or close. Relocating a restaurant of that size and reputation is possible but expensive and uncertain. I thought about Maria, who had been working the lunch shift at Hargrove's for 11 years. I thought about the teenage kid my father had hired off a work release program and taught to cook. I thought about a lot of things. How firm is the preservation group's financing? They have a signed letter of intent from 2 local banks. Nicole paused. The weak point is the timeline. They need 60 days. Callaway is offering half that. Tell Callaway I'm not interested. Go back to the preservation group and close at their number. Nicole was quiet for a beat. Maya. That's a $150,000 decision. I know what it is. Proceed. On day 19, Derek managed to corner me. I had been visiting a job site on the east side, and he had apparently, as I found out later, driven past my car 3 times looking for it. He was waiting in the parking lot when I came out. He looked worse than I had ever seen him. Tired in a way that wasn't about sleep. He had always been certain in a way that I had envied when we were younger, certain about who he was, certain about his place in the family, certain about his value. He did not look certain now. You could have told us, he said. Not angry, which surprised me, just tired. All this time, would it have changed how you treated me? He didn't answer right away. I don't know. Maybe. That's honest, at least. Brittany didn't mean for Cody to say that. She didn't tell him to say that at dinner. She didn't tell him not to. I looked at him directly. She said it enough times in her own house that it became what he believed was true. Kids don't manufacture contempt from nothing, Derek. They absorb it. He ran a hand over his face. This is going to kill Dad's restaurant. I sold to a group that intends to preserve the building and renew the lease for 15 years. At market rate, which is higher than what he's been paying. So no, it's not going to kill the restaurant. It just means he'll have to operate at real costs instead of the ones I was subsidizing. Derek stared at me. You sold to the preservation group. Yes. So the restaurant is staying. The building is staying. The restaurant can stay. It'll cost more to operate, but Hargrove's has been undercharging for the space for 3 years. That was always going to end eventually. He was quiet for a long time. The wind came through the parking lot, and he shoved his hands in his pockets. Why did you do it in the first place? Buying the building. Why didn't you just tell Dad what was happening? I thought about this. Because I thought if I did something that mattered without anyone knowing, it would prove something to myself. That I was part of this family even when I wasn't in the building. Even when nobody called to ask my opinion. Even when the story everyone told was that I left. I paused. It didn't prove that. It just extended the situation for 3 years. I should have walked away from trying to prove anything a long time ago. Derek looked at the ground. I never thought of you that way. Like you didn't belong. You didn't correct the people who did. He had no answer for that. Eventually, he got in his car and drove away. The sale to the preservation group closed on day 31. The wire came through on a Tuesday morning. Nicole sent the final paperwork with a brief note. Transaction complete. Hargrove's Grill has received formal notice of the new ownership and the terms of the 15-year lease renewal. Your father's attorney has confirmed receipt. I sat at my desk for a while after reading that. The number in my account was larger than it had been before. I felt less than I expected to feel. 3 days after the sale, I received an email from my father's personal account. He had never emailed me before. The subject line said only, Maya. I've been sitting here for 3 days trying to write this. I've started it more times than I can count. Every version I write sounds like an excuse, so I'm going to try to write it without any of those. I knew something was wrong in that family for a long time. I saw how Brittany talked about you when she thought I wasn't listening. I heard things I should have addressed. I told myself it was family friction, that it would smooth out, that it wasn't my place to manage Derek's marriage. Those were all excuses. It was my place. You were my daughter and you were being pushed to the edges of this family, and I let it happen because it was easier than the conversation. You kept the doors open for 3 years, literally. And I had no idea. That tells me everything about who you are and everything about what I failed to see. The lease terms are fair. We'll adjust. The restaurant will be fine, I think. I'm less sure about the rest of it. I understand if you need distance. I'm not writing this to ask you back to Sunday dinners or to pretend that things are fixed. I'm writing it because you deserve to hear that I understand what you did and what we cost you. I'm sorry I looked away. Love, Dad. I read it twice. I put my phone face down on the desk and went back to work. The following week, a message appeared in my social media notifications. Cody. His account had an avatar of a video game character and 46 followers. Aunt Maya, I'm sorry for what I said at dinner. I didn't understand why it was bad. I do now. Mom explained it. I was wrong. I looked at that message for a long time. He was 11. In another year he would be a teenager, starting to build his own understanding of things separate from what his parents had shown him. Maybe that could go a different direction. Maybe it wouldn't. I didn't know yet. I typed back, "Thank you for saying that." It took courage. I didn't go back to Sunday dinners that winter. Or that spring. The first Sunday in June, I drove past Hargrove's on my way home from a site visit and saw that the parking lot was nearly full, the window sign lit up. The little hand-painted hours board my father had painted himself still visible through the glass. The restaurant was still there. The building was still standing. The garland was long gone, replaced by a hanging basket of flowers my mother had planted every summer since I could remember. I sat in my car at the light and watched it for a moment. I thought about what I had told Derek in that parking lot, that I had spent years trying to prove something to myself. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that I had loved that restaurant, and that family in the specific, painful way that people love things they can't quite reach. I had held the door open from the outside for 3 years thinking it was an act of love. Maybe it was. Maybe it was also a way of staying attached to something I should have let go of sooner. The light changed. I drove home. Some debts, I had learned, are not owed to the people who claim them. Some investments pay off in ways that have nothing to do with the return. And some buildings are worth more than their market value not because of what they hold, but because of what you finally understand when you let them go. I had stopped waiting to be counted as part of something. I was building my own things now. Solid foundations. Clear terms. No hidden agreements that only one side knew about. If that made me the one who had walked away, I could live with that. I had never been better at living with things than I was now.